Here's all right, good morning everybody and happy Friday. It looks like we've got a few folks on the phone, and we've got 6 of us here in the room today to for our next Standards Alignment Advisory Committee. So I'm going to start off and give you an overview of the agenda that we have for today. We have 2 hours blocked for this conversation. It's unlikely that we'll go quite that long. We just have a couple of things to check in with everybody about, but that will also leave plenty of time for questions and conversation if that comes up. So we have Kate here driving the webinar for us, so we'll be checking in periodically. If you have questions that you want to write into the question boxes there on your computer, and we can also then unmute you if you have things that you want to talk about using your actual voice. Okay, so let's go on, look at the agenda on the next page. So as it shows here, I'm going to start off with an agenda review. Luba's going to spend some time giving us some more context and then walking through the Thrive's feedback report from the community meetings that just happened over the course of the summer. And then Deb O'Neill and Sonia are going to talk about the WAC updating process. I think they'll be talking, oh, they're not. Luba's motioning.
So Sonia is sick today.
So I'm sorry.
I will cover her slides.
Okay, excellent. So it'll be more Luba telling us about the weighted WAC process, I believe. And then we'll hear a little bit from the QPPG team to talk about progression development. So Rachel and Kelly are both here in the room to give you an update on what's going on that side of the alignment work. And Caitlin is also out sick, so there must be something in the water right now. Hopefully everybody is staying healthy and well. But I will cover the little bit that we know right now about the Head Start new standards and how that fits into this project, and then we'll be done. And as you all know well by now, we have lots of opportunity in between all of these different subjects to pause for questions and conversation. So do you want to go ahead and get started, Luba, and talk about the Standards Alignment Report?
Morning, everyone. So as you remember, we've been touching base on this particular subject somewhere in the summer, where Holly from Thrive by 5 presented us an overview of the draft of the report. So we attached the report as a part of today's conversation. So it's a big report. I understand that you didn't have a chance to actually read it through. There are approximately 54 pages, a lot of core data, raw data that this report is based on. I will just go through main points of the report and how the report is structured, so you will understand a little bit better how to navigate those 54 pages. So the best part of the report that it's a key participation data. There have been 23 statewide feedback sessions, 467 stakeholders been participating, and they've been representing a variety of settings, different type of providers, different type of stakeholders, as well as different representation from racial, ethnic, cultural, and different income groups, as well as linguistic communities. And the cultural communities that have been represented, as well as linguistic, you have a list on the slide. They've been also online portal, and online portal allowed people to provide additional comments, but because it's been anonymous, the participants of the online portal didn't have to leave any information about themselves. So we know that there have been 113 comments, but we don't know for sure who left those comments if people didn't feel comfortable leaving their contact information or their names. If you will look at the report, there are 3 subsets of the data, or how data being looked at. The first subset of the data is specifically about language of the rules and how participants of the feedback process, what suggestions they're giving in regard of how we can improve the language of the rules, so the impact of cultural linguistic communities and racial communities will not be as dramatic as it could be. Then the second subset of the data, specifically looking at the implementation of the rules, not the language of the rules, but implementation of the rules. And the third subset of the data and suggestions looking at the cross-sector work or systems changes that we need to consider in order for the new rules not impact the cultural, linguistic, and racial ethnic communities in the way that rules could impact them. So I will specifically look today at their suggestions that have been given in regard of the language of the rules, and I think it will be a bigger conversation that we all as stakeholders of the early learning system will have to have in regard of the implementation and system changes that we may need to consider to make through the implementation process or prior to implementation process. So as you see on slide 4, the next slide, there are some specific data themes. Definitely participants acknowledge that good intentions and attention for high quality access for all of the children. So the equity perspective that rules do have in regard of the different settings and differences in different settings. We're also looking at the same expectation of quality. At the same time, they're definitely acknowledging that providers require support, specifically providers who represent communities of color, different linguistic and cultural communities. They need additional access to support and additional and specific support that they may require, which could be different compared to other type of providers. Also, they've been talking specifically about translation interpretation support and services that are needed for different cultural and linguistic subgroups. And as we all know, we have a big number of refugee immigrant populations in our state, and we definitely need to get additional resources to allow to have translation interpretation support in all of the communities around the state. Participants also specifically talk about support that different families coming from different cultural backgrounds need and accommodations that we need to provide to the families to overcome different systematic challenges, system challenges, and sometimes rule challenges in regard of access to quality childcare. And also how rules sometimes, as the families and parents learning the rules or learning the practices of the providers which are based on the rules, how it's sometimes complicated and challenging for families to be a part of the center-based environment or a family home environment that is not considering the cultural or linguistic differences that children bring to the care. And also a big piece is how we'll need to look and implement systemic supports and look at the systems, not only the early learning but also health system, K-12 system, higher education system, social services, and how we establish this cross-sector work that will support our expectations of the equitable quality for all children in all settings in early learning. So looking at the next slide, I would like to talk a little bit about how the feedback that's been provided during their feedback process. And as you remember, we've been focusing on the specific drafts of the rules, as well as focusing on specific questions in regard of how this particular rules may impact communities of color providers, communities of color, and linguistic and cultural communities, as well as children and families who are representing communities of color, as well as cultural and linguistic communities. So I will give you some examples. It's just kind of a surface examples for now. What kind of 5 examples have been up there that we can bring to today's conversation as the report been finalized a couple of weeks ago. At the same time, we are planning to have all examples and all justifications of how feedback been included into the latest version or latest draft of the rules as we will release the full document of all justifications around March. So the first example is about professional development. So community feedback report proposed the following changes. Have different standards for child care center and family child care because standards proposed are unattainable for family child care providers. Also lower the education requirement for aides because it could be a barrier for people who come from communities with higher dropout rates. So now the WAC draft is looking at differentiating family home licensee and a center early learning program licensee and or center director and or center program supervisor. So the expectations in regard of the qualification and specifically education requirements are different. So for the family home, have an EC short certificate as verified in the electronic workforce registry within 3 years of the date this section becomes effective or from being licensed. While for the center, would it be licensee or center director, center supervisor, have an ECE state certificate as verified in electronic workforce registry within 3 years of the date this section becomes effective or from being employed or licensed. In regard of the instructional aids or aids, because now we have kind of two types of aids, instructional aids focusing more on supporting teachers in during their interactions with children, where aids more focusing on supporting environments and how to keep environment intact. We're requiring both of those aides have a high school diploma or GED or be currently enrolled in high school or an equivalent education program. So this is how we embedded recommendations from the communities to the current draft of the WAC. So the second example is about restraint. So community feedback report proposed the following changes. Give providers the option to remove a child or the other children, whichever is safe, in some particular situations. So the WAC draft been changed, and now we have the following language. If an early learning provider follows all strategies in this section and the child continues to behave in unsafe manner, only an early learning licensee, center director, program supervisor, or lead teacher may physically remove the child to a less stimulating environment. Physical removal of a child is determined by that child's ability to walk. If the child is able to walk, staff may hold the child's hand and walk him or her away from the situation. And B, if the child is not able to walk, staff may pick the child up and remove him or her to a quiet place where the child cannot hurt themselves or others. Staff must remain calm and use a calm voice when directing the child. So those are the changes that have been implemented in the latest language of the WAC draft based on the community feedback. The third example is about expulsion. So community feedback report proposed the following changes. Require that providers offer support and collaboration with the family before a child is expelled. So the WAC draft now is saying the following. If an early learning provider must expel a child because it's not able to meet the child's individual safety needs or the safety needs of others, the early learning provider must A, share with the family or of the expelled child the program expulsion policy, B, provide a record to the parents about the expulsion and the steps taken to avoid expulsion, C, refer the family to alternative services, assessments, or programs that may be able to meet the child's needs, and D, maintain a record about the expulsion and the steps taken to avoid expulsion in the child's file. So there are two more examples. Example number 4 is about family partnership and communication. So the community feedback report proposed the following change. In the information collected from families, include caregivers' attitudes, beliefs, and philosophy about child rearing. So WAC draft definitely now including the following language that is kind of following the request from the community. An early learning provider must communicate with families to identify individual children's developmental goals. So talking with the family in regard of what the expectations and development of their child. An early learning provider must attempt to collaborate with each child's family upon enrollment and annual thereafter to obtain information about the child's development, behavioral, health, linguistic, cultural, social, and other relevant information. An e-learning provider must give families opportunities to share their language and culture in the e-learning program. So we're trying to create all possible opportunities for families to be able to share with the provider their beliefs and philosophy about how they would like to raise their child and how for their child to be developed. And the last example is about children outcomes and developmental screening. So the community feedback report proposed the following changes. Spread awareness of families about what screenings are, why they're helpful, and how to use the information, including the option to opt out of screenings. Consider the timing and frequency of screenings in concert with other providers in the family's life to ensure that screenings are capturing children's true abilities in their cultural linguistic context. Children aren't receiving duplicative or contradicting screenings. Providers aren't overwhelmed with a large volume of screenings in short time periods. So considering all of the levels of feedback around developmental screenings, including the community feedback, we changed the developmental screening requirements in the WAC draft. So we are not asking providers now in the new draft to actually conduct developmental screenings. So here's the language of the latest WAC draft. An e-learning provider must inform parents or guardians about the importance of developmental screenings for each child from birth to age 5. An e-learning provider must keep documentation of this communication to parents in the facility records. An e-learning provider must share information with parents or guardians about organizations that conduct developmental screenings, such as local agencies, school districts, healthcare providers, or specialists. So as you see, the expectation is that providers will share the information about the importance of developmental screening and also who can conduct a qualified developmental screening.
It doesn't preclude providers from doing that.
Absolutely not.
Themselves, right?
But at the same time, they can do referral, and the goal is that families understand the meaning of developmental screening and they use this data appropriately as these providers will. So it doesn't matter who will conduct developmental screening, and the importance is in data and information that will be used for development of this particular child and learning and teaching environment for this particular child. So please enjoy the full report, and if you have any questions, please contact me directly or contact Thrive in regard of the full report and all the data that's represented in the report.
Who's the contact at Thrive?
Holly or Dan. It's you can go to the web page that's dedicated on the Thrive web page for the alignment, and you will see contact information right there. Any questions about?
I think we saw a couple on there.
It's hand raised, and then we have a question.
Okay. Do you, so we can go ahead and let's answer the questions that are written up there first. Is there anything in the drafts about ensuring that expulsion conversations must be in the parent's language?
Can you read it one more time? Can you read it one more time? I just cannot
Is there anything in the draft about ensuring that expulsion conversations must be in the parent's language?
Yes, we're saying in the draft that if parents need interpretation services, then they can request interpretation services from the provider.
So, V, you had your hand raised as well. Did you want to speak more to that? I guess we need to unmute her to actually hear her say yes or no to my question. We'll get there. Hold on just a sec. Okay, V, you're unmuted if you want to add more context to your question.
Hi, hi everyone. This is V. I just want to make sure that I understand that parents can always request interpreters, but is that enough? Because I know that parents may not realize that they are able to ask for interpreters or feel like they have the support or feel like this is something that they keep, or even know that this is something that they can ask for?
So I think it's where we may need to require the providers to share this information. If they're serving someone who is representing different linguistic group, that we may require providers to share with the parents that if they need translation services, they may need to request those services. Because not every single provider may speak the language of the child or the family. So then parents may need to know that they have to request translation services or interpretation services.
Absolutely. I fully agree with making sure that the parents are aware that this is something that they can ask for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think your question speaks to the larger issue around communication with parents, obviously not just about expulsion, but how providers are effective in engaging with families. So that's a good point to bring up. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Jessica has a couple of questions. When will this be available in writing, and when will the expulsion info be well, let's just do that one first. When will this be available in writing? I imagine you're talking about the report itself and your comments.
The report itself is already available for you, so it will be posted on the Dell website and it will be posted on the Tribe website next week if you're talking about the report. But my guess is you're also talking about the new WAC drafts. So the new WAC drafts, as you know, we're preparing them for the waiting process, and we hope that they will be available for public next week. We are looking at the timeline of November 23rd before the holiday. But those drafts will go for the waiting, so all of the focus groups, and we will talk about it in a sec, all focus groups will be organized based on the new drafts, as well as everyone can see the latest drafts, hopefully. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, next week.
Okay, and Jessica had another question. When should expulsion information be provided to parents? After the expulsion or before?
So it's during the process. It's how it's written. So through the process of if the provider is experiencing some behavior issues, the expectation is and the requirement is that parents are immediately informed. So through the whole process of how to resolve the issues of the child, parents need to be informed about it.
As it's happening.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and my guess is, too, that there is an expectation in the parent handbook that this information is laid out fairly explicitly when parents first come into that child care facility. Yes. All right.
It's an expulsion policy that every provider have to have.
Claudette has a question about the language of restraint. When we use the word able to walk, does that mean developmentally or able at the time? Like a preschool child who goes limp on the ground, we've all seen that, or kicking and hitting?
No, we're talking about actually ability to walk from the developmental perspective. We're talking about infant toddlers. We're talking about specific age group. It's what ability to walk means. So, or physical ability to walk if we're talking about children on IP. So this is what we're talking about. So if a child not able to walk because of the behavior concern but physically able to walk, then we have to make everything possible that we are not dragging the child, we're not picking the child up, the child is walking with us. So this is what ability to walk means.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Jessica got a question about will information about who can do screenings be provided to providers? And this did come up a lot in the
Yes.
community meetings. Where do they get that information?
Yes, so it will be our responsibility, the Department of Early Learning responsibility, as well as in working with our partners and stakeholders, specifically if we're talking about some health providers, and we know now health providers can actually do developmental screening and charge Medicaid in order to do developmental screening for every single child. But we also know situations when not all of the families may have a health home or a health provider. So because of that, it will be our responsibility to create per community list of possible organizations, possible health providers where developmental screening can be conducted. So it will be available for the providers, and we will have to update it regularly.
Okay, so Shana has a question about translation services, and she's saying in the nursing environment, translation services are available in most, if not all, hospital rooms. Are they calling someone on site, or is it somewhere off site? And if there is a number that can be reached, is it possible to connect child care providers with it as well?
Yeah, I think, yes, it will be our responsibility to ensure that providers know where to request translation interpretation services, who can provide those services. And again, going back to this shared services system, that if you will look at the report and you will read the report in length, then you will see that this is one of the suggestions that community is bringing to our attention, to create shared services, community-based shared services, where each community will know where to go in situations of translation interpretation or developmental screening or number of other things that family home providers or small center providers may not be able to afford by themselves, but if there will be shared service available, then collectively they will be able to afford it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we will be able to support them in kind of organized manner versus to support each of them independently.
And then I think, let's see, I didn't follow the, Jessica commented, I didn't follow the piece at the top about different standards for family child care and center-based providers. Can you repeat or provide in writing? You want to go back over the...
So I can definitely repeat it, but it will be in writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it will be in writing next week. So I will repeat it again. So for the family home licensee, must meet the following qualification: have an ECE short certificate, which, as you remember, 12 credits, as verified in the electronic workforce registry, which is right now Merit, within 3 years of the date the section becomes effective, meaning from the date that we will start enforcing the rules, or from being licensed. And from the Center E-Learning Program licensee or a center director, because in some situations we have licensee and center director and supervisor, it's one person. If it's a bigger center, there could be 3 different people or 2 different people. Have an ECE state certificate, again, as verified in electronic workforce registry, which is Merit right now, within 3 years of the date the section becomes effective, or from being employed or licensed. And for instructional aides and program aides, have a high school diploma or GED, or be currently enrolled in high school or an equivalent education program.
All right, so I think we've answered all of the questions that were posted on the webinar question box. And you want to just talk about the next steps real quick? I don't think we got quite to that, Luba, before we move on.
Yes, so in regard to the next steps, Dale will include standard proposed changes, community feedback to the justifications I mentioned already. And also I mentioned that implementation and system changes that have been proposed, we need to look at them collectively as stakeholders, as partners, because it's kind of a collective responsibility. And it's why I count on you reading the full report in length, and we need to start thinking about how we will review the report, and specifically in regard to implementation suggestions and cross-sector systemic changes suggestions, and start thinking collectively how we will be able to create more friendly and useful environment for the providers and families who represent different cultural communities.
Thank you. Before we move on, are there any questions in the room? All right, so we are going to now talk a little bit about the weighted WAC process. So I think we're going to start with Deb O'Neill, and I believe you're unmuted, Deb.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. And we're in a great place now with the standards alignment, and have been working the last couple of months on revisions and updates, and really looking at some intentional work in regards to consolidating and streamlining some of the language, and which has resulted in reduction of the overall length. So that will be certainly helpful as far as the amount of the product and how long it is. So I will be finishing up some of those things as far as the legal and technical review. We've had a great individual that has come to the department to help with that, to really polish up the standards. So we're in a great place, and we're on target with release of those for the weighted WAC focus groups for next week. So that's an exciting place to be. The justifications, we do have an executive summary that outlines the historical part of the Early Start Act and why we're doing what we're doing in the state of Washington, and then also will recap in some of these things you heard from Luba already with licensing revisions, what kind of changes are there due to the alignment gaps, changes for what the Department of Early Learning sees as priorities, and then also incorporating in the CCDF and Caring for Our Children standards that are critical for our work forward too, and the outcomes for children. And then the changes that you also heard from Luba in regards to the community input. So the executive summary will certainly outline all of those, and then additional work that we're moving forward with is to incorporate some of those changes into our justification sections so that they are a little more enhanced with the research-based writing, where resources were for the writing, and making sure that's outlined so that it's clear for not only our community but also our licensing staff and our child care providers, so that they're clear on where the rules came from and understanding the basis of why it's written the way it is. So we are finishing up the content review and doing our final edits for the weighting process. So next week we're looking forward to posting these with the categories remaining the same, but some revisions in regards to the organization. Again, I did mention that the overall length has been reduced, but we did do some organizational refinement to break things up a little bit differently for an easier read for everyone. There was an internal review for all of Department of Early Learning licensing staff. We requested that they take a look at the standards alignment, and we had some very specific questions on implementation. So really asking them to review of what does this look like on the ground, how do we implement this as we're doing our work with the child care environments, and making sure that we understood whether there be training issues or clarification even in the standards alignment writing, to make sure we're all clear and on the same page with that. So we are finishing up assimilating all of that and then analyzing it to see where we go from here in regards to training issues and how to help our staff move forward. Some of those issues that were indicated in the implementation review, we will also take a look at for partnering with training for providers as well. That will help everyone be on the same page. And then we will have the comments portal open after things are released to get input from community and stakeholders in regards to the draft language. So we're in a great place. As I look at 2016, there's been a great deal of work that has been done, and I think we're really close to having things polished up, and look forward to the weighted WAC process and where we end up after the focus group sessions. So that is all that I have for my update. I don't know if there are time for questions now, or we're going to wait till later on that, but that's
we'll hold on just a minute. Yeah, we'll hold on just a minute for questions, Debbie. Thank you for that report. You are right. There's been so much great work done in the last year. It's kind of amazing to look back on where we started the year and how far we've gotten. And I'm just a big shout out to you and your team. And I know Tyler is adding a lot of value in that technical writing. So we're really excited to see the next draft. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I think with Sonia out, Luba's going to step in again and give us a quick update on where we are in the focus group process, because that is just around the corner.
So as you remember, last time we've been talking about the weighted WAC process, kind of why, what, and how of it. And the first step in how we are doing it is the first step in what we need to implement is focus group process. And as you know, we've been very intentional structuring our participation and working with Thrive and the coalitions to analyze in analyzing every region that coalitions represent from the perspective of settings, how many family home providers, how many center-based providers they have in their region, and also analyzing the diversity map of all of the providers and asking coalitions to target specific populations in order to have a full statewide representation in focus groups. We are looking at 2 specific linguistic groups, Spanish and Somali, and we're also asking coalitions to compose their we name them general focus groups in consideration with other type of racial, linguistic, cultural subgroups that they may have in their community, and they have data for it. We also been looking at 5 special groups, and my understanding is that there will be a special parents focus group, and King County is working on organizing statewide parents focus group. There will be a special Head Start and ECAP focus groups, and King County is working on organizing statewide Head Start ECAP focus group. We're looking at organizing tribal providers focus group in January. Union made a decision, which has been in conversations with them this week, that they will not have a special group, but they're supporting the coalitions that their members will be fully represented in the focus groups that each coalition putting together. And also we'll have our internal statewide licensing staff focus group. So what you have in front of you, it's 9 coalitions for now. King County didn't land on the dates yet, but you know now the dates and times for all other or majority of other coalitions. So please feel free to contact us or Thrive directly if you would like to participate or would like to know more about your particular region or representation of your particular provider group in this process.
Okay, anything else on that, Luba? That's going to be exciting. There's going to be a lot of discussion and waiting of like actual voting, right?
Yes, so what focus group, as you remember, will be focusing on, they will look at all of the rules and they will have to make a decision if this rule will have a direct impact on child health and safety, and then we need to go and weight it higher than the minimum weight. So the rules that will not go for the weighting, it doesn't mean that they will not be enforced. It just means that we know that this particular rules will not directly harm, from the health perspective or safety perspective, children. So it's kind of the severity level. So it's what focus groups will do, kind of pre-sorting before the survey process.
And I'm sure you've all heard this from Luba before, but we are working with a national expert who has managed and facilitated this process in other states. So it may sound a little bit convoluted at this point, but it's actually tried and true methodology that will be a great procedure for us. Okay, so there's a couple of questions up on the board that I'm going to take a pause here and read through. Allison had a question about how and why groups were selected to participate and why we have such a limited number of groups and providers.
So the methodology is looking at sampling. So as you know, we have different subgroups may have different opinions about how to weigh the walk. So we've been looking how each subgroup, from the perspective of settings, from the perspective of diversity, different type of diversity, have to be represented and have a solid statewide sample. So it's why we mapped our state from all geographical perspective in consideration with 10 coalition regions and identified number of center home providers in each region, as well as diversity of all of the providers in each region. And we provided recommendations to each coalition how to compose the group. So this is what methodology is asking us to do. Because again, it's not a community engagement process, it's a weighting process.
Okay, Shana had a question about, she's looking at WAC. I'm impressed you even wrote this down. Okay, 170.06.0120. This is, and she's noting that I see a lot here regarding education of the providers, but what about the suitability of even being a child care provider in the first place? And she's saying, as far as background checks being more strict.
So as you know, the background check requirements are coming from the federal requirements, and we are approaching it based on the federal requirements, and we're operating based on the director's list, and director's list kind of our core document that is looking at the suitability of the provider. So it's how we arranging it and operating based on it. And again, it's a federal requirement.
Okay, Jessica had a question about how should people and organizations give feedback regarding the waiting WAC process if they are not invited to participate in the focus groups.
So the focus groups are not about providing the feedback to the WAC drafts. I thought that we already kind of have a shared understanding of it. Focus groups, again, are not about providing feedback for the WAC drafts. Focus groups are the waiting process focus groups. So focus groups is a part of the methodology, waiting a licensing rules methodology that's been developed by Dr. Finney and by National Association of Regulatory Administration. So we need to separate those two processes, commenting on the latest drafts and waiting the WAC focus groups. So again, focus groups will specifically look at the latest drafts from the intent perspective and think about what level of severity toward the possible harm to children and families we need to consider in regard of every single rule.
So Jessica's wondering if they are not open to anyone to just join in those, how do they weigh in if they aren't invited? How do they provide input?
So the input process, in regard of the content input process, it will happen after the waiting as we discussed the latest timeline. As you remember the latest timeline, it's where all comments and all of the negotiation of the rules will happen. So we will look together at the content and waiting.
So Shana has a couple more questions around background checks, just generally observing that federal requirements are more strict than the director's list allows. And I'm not sure if that's true. Can you speak to that, Luba? And then just before you start, she's also asking, why is it that a provider who would not be cleared to attend a field trip as a chaperone at their child's school is being allowed to work out or run child cares with our most vulnerable populations?
So I do believe that we're operating based on the federal requirements, and our expectations in regard of the portable background check and character suitability are as strong as federal requirements. But each state is looking at director's list, and each state may have their own specifics in a director's list, because federal government is providing kind of a general perspective on the director's list, and each state has its own legal differences in regard of different issues with the legal system. So then each state has its own director's list.
And for what it's worth, this is Heather again, I think what we are trying to do here in Washington when we look at our director's list is really make sure that we aren't adversely impacting minority populations that are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So I think that there are a lot of different states that approach that differently. So when Luba is talking about the director's list, it really is state specific, but it is always operated or created within the federal guidelines. Your comment about the differences between what's allowed in schools just highlights the fact that there are different standards in the K-12 system, and we try to align as much as possible where we can. Okay, so Claudette has a question here about maybe it would help to describe how focus groups are chosen and how the coalitions are determining who makes up those focus groups.
So we talked about it at the last advisory committee meeting. We've been describing the participation criteria and methodology of how focus groups will be organized. A question in regard of how coalitions are chosen, they're choosing the participants based on the data that we provided to them in regard of, again, what type of settings they have in their regions and what type of the diversity they have in the region. So they're targeting all of the populations that they need to target based on their local regional data. And the focus group is up to 20 people. So then they're kind of figuring out how their sample in consideration with different settings and different diversity will be adequate to the regional map. So I will suggest you will contact specific coalitions or Thrive by 5 in order to have more specific information, how each of them are making their choices based on the recruitment activities that they're putting together. I do know that now they're in contact with the union, so union definitely will be helping them to recruit family home providers. In regard of other providers and other diversity groups, I will suggest to contact each coalition or Thrive by 5.
Yep. So Jessica, I think that gets to your question. That would be a good idea to follow up with Thrive on this one. Okay, any other questions in the room before we move on? All right, we are moving right along here. So now we are going to hear from Rachel, who's going to give us some more information that looks like on the timeline of the additional progression pieces beyond the licensing standards.
Hi, everybody. So you've seen this timeline before, but we've actually updated it to include the information about the weighted WAC process, so you can see the parallel processes that are happening. So the chart shows on the left-hand side, you'll see the weighted WAC process, and the right-hand side reflects the early achievers and ECAP progressions process. So we're kind of in this middle section here, which is the green bar, the August of 2016 to May of 2017. And throughout each of these phases, we definitely are in that ongoing application of a racial equity and cultural humility principles as far as our alignment process goes, making sure that we're paying attention to each of our guiding principles as we go along. So we are in the process of writing and reviewing our early achievers and ECAP standards and working on our engaging communities for feedback, which we will talk about a little bit later this morning. During the 2017 to 2018 school year, we will be providing coordinated training and technical assistance on all of the newly aligned standards, and the date for our full implementation of our aligned standards is July 1st of 2018. So you see there's a lot of things happening.
It sounds so far away, but it's really just around the corner.
I was having that reflection yesterday, thinking, oh my gosh, 2018 is like right around the corner. It's like virtually 12 months away. Like, holy smokes, how did that happen? It was also really important for us to share with you all the different sources that we're using as our early achievers and ECAP teams are diving into this progression writing. So you see we've got this lovely colorful matrix for you that includes everything from our Thrive Washington Racial Equity Theory of Change to the National Institute for Early Education Research, to the Early Start Act, of course, Caring for Our Children, and basing everything on our proposed WAC that we've been working on. So it's really important for us to be able to pull from all of these state and national resources so that we can create a very strong set thread from our new proposed WAC through early achievers on up into ECAP. Our writing teams, as you know, are cross-sector teams that include early achievers, ECAP, and licensing staff. And we've been working really hard to make sure that we're having regular and ongoing conferencing back and forth between the writing teams to make sure that we are actually producing a well-connected progression. We don't want to be writing in isolation and then come together at the end of a section of time and realize, oh gosh, you went this way and our team went another way. So we've had some really strong leadership on our writing teams that have done a really good job of connecting with one another to keep things informed. So I think we're making some really good progress through our work. And that's about where we are here.
Well, that's a really cool slide, and I just think it's so much fun that we all work in the early learning environment where we can have such bright colors on this cold November day. Okay, do you want to? Can you see if there are any questions real quick just before we start? Because Kelly's got a lot of detail to go into. Yeah. Okay. So, Rachel. Well, let me see. Okay, so Shana has a question. Then wouldn't that mean that Washington standards are not, in fact, in alignment with federal restrictions? Okay, so we're still talking about background check. If this is a state-specific, as it's said to be. Further, if states are able to deviate from federal standards, as you stated, then why not deviate to a more strict set of requirements, requiring providers to post a list of background check results for each worker, wouldn't discriminate at all against the populations. I think there's a lot of detail in background checks, and it's a pretty complex process, Shana, so I'd love to maybe take this conversation offline, and we would welcome a more detailed conversation with you about concerns that you have about the background check process and the director's list in general. I know that Ross is very open to that, and Luba and I are both here, and we're happy to engage in that. So if you want to reach out to us specifically, that would be welcome. Okay, so Claudette also had a conversation, and Shana, you can see, I think, are our emails, is somebody's email on here? Well, you've got an email in the meeting invitation that includes Luba's and my addresses, so you can look at that there. Okay, Claudette has a question. Coalitions are always open to more people joining and attending, and I think what that points out too is that Luba didn't say this explicitly, but I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that there are people who are sort of the people who are doing the waiting, and then there might be an opportunity for people to come and observe the process and sort of watch informally. Maybe?
So if you're interested to watch how the process will go, absolutely. It's a public process. It's no limitation. So please contact the coalitions and let them know that even you may not be chosen to be part of the focus group, but you would like to participate as an observer.
Great. Okay, so back to our colorful slides, and now we're going to turn it over to Kelly, who is going to give us a little bit more detail about the feedback process and the writing process around the progression side of things.
Thanks, Heather. Happy Friday, and hi to everybody. I just wanted to say that all we get to see, on our screen are these, lists of names of people that we get to work with, all of you doing this. And so I just want to let you know that I'm imagining all your faces here with us in the room, because it just feels like you're so far out there, but I want to let you know you're not. I feel like we can see you, and I'm so glad you guys are a part of this. So Rachel did a great job of laying the groundwork when it comes to the timeline for the early achievers and ECAP writing that's happening, as well as some of the important reference documents and research and work that we're utilizing to guide some of the decisions we're making as we're putting these first drafts together. And so this next piece that I'm going to talk about is about what we're doing once we get to draft stages. So really the engagement process with all of you and with our larger stakeholder community around how we'll go about soliciting feedback and engaging with folks about how those standards are looking and how people are thinking about what those might look like in implementation, which is really at the core of all of this. And so in this, as Heather described, beautiful, colorful visual that we have here, this just gives you a sense. These boxes really represent each stage of the review process that we've at least mapped out for now. I think one of the things that's really important that we want to recognize is that as we go through each section and we have a draft, we're going to learn a lot, and we'll make course corrections as we go, and we're really going to lean on the steering committee and all of you to help us course correct along the way. And as we get out to community feedback, we'll certainly be listening to that as well, and we'll make those adjustments as we go. So as you can see, as this is laid out, we begin each stage of the process. So as each section of the standards becomes ready for review, as we get to a draft stage, so we just are now, for example, getting to the draft stage of our family engagement process or section, which is the first section that we're working on. The first thing that will happen is that the early achievers, ECAP, and our licensing partners who are working with us will come together and look at the full progression together as it stands for that section. And then it will go on to that green box, which is our DEL consultants. So these are the same consultants that we're utilizing for, they're our alignment consultants essentially. So they're the same consultants that have been advising us along the way, both Harriet and Belisa. So they'll be taking a peek at it and giving us feedback. And so before I go to the DEL steering and advisory committees and where you become engaged after the consultants, I just also wanted to mention that each of those, you see those little colored arrows in between the boxes, we'll actually be doing team reviews in each of those arrows too. So when I say team reviews, meaning our internal EA and ECAP licensing team will continue to look at the feedback we get from DEL consultants and the advisory committees, et cetera, along the way. So after it goes to the consultants, it'll then come to the DEL steering and advisory committees, all of you, for your feedback and engagement around that. And then it'll go back to the consultants again. So the consultants, their role is to really help look at that full progression. You know, they've been involved in this process all along the way, and there's that lens for us. They're making sure that we're really creating a continuum and giving us a lot of great feedback, not only on that, but on content that they're seeing. So that's why they're at those two different places, and obviously they're pretty much involved with us along the way too, but those are targeted opportunities for them. And then once it goes to the DEL consultants, again, then it will really engage the community feedback process, and I'm not going to get into that in too much detail right now because we're going to talk about that in an upcoming slide. So once that process, so we work through that process section by section, what we're then hoping to do is something that is also still in the works, but we're really hoping to look to the expertise of both our DEL racial equity team and internal team, as well as the ELAC Advancing Racial Equity Subcommittee, to help us apply a racial equity lens section by sections as we go through the process. And again, that's something that we are, still hoping for, and we're not quite there, but we put placeholders there because we know how really critical it is to apply that lens throughout the process. And then another box that we have that we're still sort of also trying to think through, and part of the reason we don't really have it defined yet is because we're looking to all of you as our advisory committee to help us think through about the community feedback process, sort of these last four boxes that I'm going over: the community feedback, the racial equity reviews, and then the role of Thrive in those community meetings. We're really interested in hearing from you about what's worked well so far, and how we might think about doing that. But this is sort of the proposal and how it falls out for now. So do we want to just keep going for now?
I think so.
Okay. All right, so in this next slide, we wanted to give you, we're working really hard. I also just want to, throw a shout out to the incredible work happening inside our teams here at DEL to just get this started. And again, it's our ECAP folks, our early achievers team, and our licensing partners who are, working so hard to pull all these section edits and changes together and to really try to see the full progression play out together. So we wanted to give you a sneak peek because we know coming up on December 9th at our next advisory committee meeting that's going to really be the full deep dive for all of you to really get into what these boxes that you see in this visual represent. So this just gives you a peek at how the overarching section, which we call family engagement, family partnership, and communication, is playing out. So you can see in the red, that's the foundational WAC element around that very thing. And then you can see as it gets into early achievers and ECAP, you see a lot of subsections start to play out. And so I'm not going to go through all those, but that's essentially how the progression is looking and working. And again, soon you're really going to have the detail of that content in your hands to dive into and to give us feedback around. So that's really all for that slide.
Exciting.
Isn't that exciting to see?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It's exhausting and exciting. And I just say exhausting because let's be real here.
Yeah.
Systems work is just that, but it's also really, really exciting and full of possibility. So again, I said we'd talk a little bit more with you. We really want to engage with you around this whole concept around community and stakeholder feedback. Again, there are a lot of sections, as you know, when it comes to the early achievers and ECAP standards that we will want to work through with our communities and stakeholders. And so we really want to take a moment to have you think with us. So as we think about the broad range of stakeholders who might be interested in reviewing and providing feedback to these revised standards, to these specific parts of the progression. We want to be really thoughtful about the methods we use as we have throughout this process, but we want to really continue to learn about how we want to go about gathering feedback, recognizing the range of needs and preferences that exist across the stakeholder population. Again, I know this goes without saying, but we really are putting a lens on this. And so we will likely provide many of the same options that we have already with, a mix of webinar sessions, online feedback, community setting feedback, and engagement opportunities. But what we're really interested in right now is hearing from you about what you really feel has worked well to date and some of the key considerations that we need to take into account early on in this process. And again, I can't say enough, as you've seen happen in the process to date with all the WAC work, is that we're going to continue to course correct, and we really rely on you to help us to do that. So I don't know if there's any questions yet, but we're really interested in any initial feedback you have around this piece, because we do need to start fleshing it out for family engagement. And I also want to say to feel free to, email myself or Rachel, for example, directly. And if you don't have our information, we can be sure to put that out in the minutes, perhaps, for this meeting. But we're happy to, take feedback after this, after you have a chance to sort of think about it a little bit more.
And we're going to just pause for a minute before we move on so that you can all be thinking about ways to respond to Kelly's question, because I think it really is helpful for us to hear back from you in these conversations that we have about what you think is working and not working, so that we can continue that adaptive management of this big, huge project. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to, and in the spirit of Kelly's comment that we are picturing you all in the room here, you all have to know that Kelly has right next to her a candy cane.
Ew.
She is eating a candy cane, so that's probably the first one I've seen this season.
Well, you need to come to our building. I'm sharing them widely because I can't get enough of oranges and candy cane.
Happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays and all that. I guess we are in the season now. So, okay, I'm giving you my little fun, and I think we're still not seeing any questions. So please just take that into account, that we are really interested in your input. So however you want to share that with us at a later date, please do so. Okay, so we are going to move on real quick. And again, Caitlin, I'm sorry to say, is out sick, but I'm going to talk to you just briefly about Head Start standards. So as you are all probably aware, Head Start just recently came out with new performance standards for their grantees across the country. And there's a link on the website so that you can look at those new performance standards that take effect this month, actually. And I just wanted to point out to you that all of our grantees here in Washington are currently and right now getting training from their regional offices on these standards. So they're pretty much hot off the presses and new for all of us to be wading through. And as you know, we have talked a lot in this project about how Head Start plays into our alignment efforts. So here's our opportunity to start thinking that through. If Caitlin were here, she would go on to these next two bullets and tell you that our plan right now is to recruit a work group of Head Start folks to help us think about crosswalking these new Head Start standards with the alignment work that we're doing here at Dell. The group would also look at opportunities to coordinate around some of our other new emerging Head Start programs, like the Early Head Start and Head Start Child Care partnerships. So we're thinking that that work group will probably be meeting starting sometime in the next month, and we hope that to fit it into the larger timeline that you've all seen before, that this work group would spend its time doing that crosswalk and really unpacking the implications of the new Head Start standards between December and March, prior to our negotiated rulemaking next spring. So just one more little piece of work that we have on our plates, our collective plates here in the next few months. So that brings us to last opportunity to ask questions. And I think I see some comments here, and I'll just tell you before we get on to those, so if you're still writing, you have time to write up there, that our next meeting, as Kelly mentioned, is December 9th, same time, same place. And we're going to be hearing a little bit more detail about the full progression from the ECAP and Early Achievers team. So that's exciting. Okay, so I have some input here. Questions regarding child safety, more specifically, why are child care providers allowed to work using names? Okay, so Shana still has some continued questions about background checks and child safety, and please do feel free to reach out, Shana. In fact, my email address is heather.moss, that's M-O-S-S, at del.wa.gov. So please, if you can just cut and paste some of your questions, that would be super helpful for me to take back to a larger team here at Dell, because I think you've got some great questions that we need to unpack a little bit more. And it looks like we got a couple other comments from Dee. I wonder if there can be some informative community cafe settings that allow more people in the provider community to start getting more real information into the hands of people who are already concerned about rumored changes. Would like to be supported as committee members to improve the public outreach. That's a great idea, and I think that that's actually something where we could really use your help, because we are only so many and here at Dell, and I think that we actually need your support in coordinating some of those community gatherings within your neighborhoods. And Karen pointed out that she found the all-day meetings to review the drafts and give feedback in small groups was really interesting and helpful. You're such a good meeting person, Karen. Those meetings are exhausting, but yeah, thanks for that feedback. And I think that's totally appropriate in a lot of the pieces that we're working on. Oh, sorry, Christine noted that I need to speak slower, speak more slowly. So we'll work on that next time. I think those are all of the questions that we have up here on the board, and I don't see any hands raised. So we are going to come to a close now, and again, as I mentioned, our next meeting is December 9th, so at that point in time, we will be just beginning the waiting meetings. I forgot now what they're called. Focus groups, thank you. So we'll be happy to check in with all of you about how that is playing out, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from Rachel and Kelly and their teams about their work that they've been doing. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.